So, bit of a description around it. Again, I know this is quite wordy. I'll read it out for you and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of stuff, okay? So, effective decision making is defined here as the process through which alternatives are selected and then managed through implementation to achieve business or any objectives, okay? It was a business context, but you could put any objectives there. Effective decisions result from a systematic process with clearly defined elements that is handled in a distinct sequence of steps. So when I've done decision making before, of course I have, and I've taught this subject before, but when it doesn't come around that often, I don't get asked to do it on a regular basis. So I kind of look back at what I've done in the past, but I also like to keep up to date and have a look online and see what are people saying out there. And it made me chuckle a little bit because it was overwhelmingly the people trying to give people processes for making a decision, which is fine. And I've got I think 6 or 7 steps of decision making for you today. I'm going to give you that as well. But some decisions are qualitative rather than quantitative, and that seems to be the bit that sometimes also lacks as well. So if it's a logical decision, then you can use a quantitative process for that. But if it's a qualitative decision, what I mean by that is maybe you're making your decision based on a feeling or what's in your head. There's not really a process for that. Certainly none that I could find out there. I think it's a little bit more complex than just giving somebody a process for making decisions. So I'm going to talk to you about both today. We'll start off with the qualitative stuff about how you make decisions based on what's in your head, and also end up by giving you a few steps of decision making. Now don't get me wrong, these steps that I'm going to give you, they may well help you with qualitative decisions as well. That's fine, no problem, but sometimes there's a little bit more to it. Sometimes there's a little bit, does it feel right? And I don't think there's a process in place. I think if somebody did find a process for qualitative decisions, they'd probably be very wealthy and very famous by now, because we all feel slightly different things at different times and so on and so on. So that's our starting point today, about just think about this qualitative, and I'll finish off with some quantitative kind of stuff. But like I've just said to you, not to confuse matters, some of the quantitative process might also help you with the qualitative process, but I don't think it's as simple or as black as white as that. Okay, so first thing we're going to look at, and some of you may remember this slide from another course that I did about people getting on with each other and all that type of stuff, is what's in your filing cabinet. So if you imagine there's a filing cabinet in your head, your brain's job, remember, you can focus on 7 to 9 things at once, on average every 7 seconds. So there's lots of information bombarding your brain every moment or every average 7 seconds of the day, and it all goes into your filing cabinet. The theory states that we retain everything we've ever heard, felt, seen, tasted, whichever the sense, touched, whatever. We retain everything from just before we're born. It's just the recall of that information that is difficult for us. So imagine how big your filing cabinet is in your head. And your filing cabinet is unique to you. It's a little bit like a fingerprint. Nobody has the same fingerprint across the world, and nobody has the same filing cabinet. And that's because in your filing cabinet you have a perceived view of how the world works, how people work, how you work, what should happen, what shouldn't happen, what's fair, what's not fair, and so on and so on. And many weeks ago I did a session around some NLP, neuro-linguistic programming stuff, and meta programs. I brought something called meta programs into it, and we all have different meta programs. For example, some people have sameness meta programs. So what that means is they focus on things that keep the same quite often, whereas some people have different meta programs where they like to change it up and so on. And there's about 9 or 10 different meta programs. And the point here, without me going into all of that, because obviously it's not an NLP session, is that we all have different filing cabinets. And you might be saying, what's this got to do with decision making? Well, your decisions will be based on what's in your filing cabinet. And that's why sometimes we don't come to the same decisions as other people. There might be a consensus, maybe, but sometimes we look and go, why would you do that? Why would you make that decision? You know, if we use the sporting, the sporting arena for an example, it's a football analogy, so apologies if you don't follow football, but if you take, the England defender that got arrested in another country, there were broadcasters going, why was he out in the public? Why didn't he choose a villa? He's got enough money to party on his own in a villa. And then another pundit's going, but why should he have to? He should be able to go out with his girlfriend and not have security. Blah, blah, blah. And everybody's arguing about the decision that he made. It makes me chuckle because nobody else can make that decision in the world apart from him. Now, whether that's right or wrong in your eyes will be based on what's in your filing cabinet. You take it, the perception of what's happening, it goes into your filing cabinet, a little bit like a checklist, and if it doesn't match some of the checks, then you don't think it's the right decision, and if it does match all of your checks, you do think it's the right decision on the back of it, which is what causes debate. It's what makes the world goes round. People disagreeing and agreeing and all this type of stuff. But that's the starting point for decision making. The starting point for decision making is what's in your filing cabinet, okay? And not to harp on about this too much, but your perception goes in, and then your recall comes out. Okay, so whatever you store in there gets stored, and then you recall it whenever you need it, and that might be around decision making. Bearing in mind your decisions will be based on that filing cabinet. So forget it. When people say no, it's just logical. It's your logic, not anybody else's logic. Okay, so this is why sometimes we don't see eye to eye with people, or people make decisions and we go, why have you done that? Why didn't you wait? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And people just go, why? It's just logical to do it that way. But it will be your logic, which might differ from somebody else's logic. Okay? So this is why sometimes we do get wound up when people make decisions. And we just, we almost go like, God, why would they do that? They've just done that. They've done that to annoy me. Or they've done that to do this, or whatever it may be. Or I can't see the logic in why you would make the decision that way. You won't be able to see their logic. Their logic's in their filing cabinet. Your logic's in your filing cabinet. Okay? My standard joke for anybody that knows me is it's a wonder any of us gets on with any of us. Because we all have different filing cabinets and we all make distant decisions based on the filing cabinet. Just to, emphasise that point, my files versus their files. We don't see the same thing than we do, and our decisions are based on our filing cabinets, not somebody else's filing cabinet. So I wanted to start with that point because I think it's an important point to make. Often, when it comes to decisions, people are more bothered about other people's decisions. Well, you can't really do anything about other people's decisions. You might be able to influence them. You certainly can't control them. So really what we've got to do is just focus on our decisions. What decisions we are making during this situation. You see this in organisational change and things like this, and people are so worried about what the company's going to do. How will it affect me? How will it affect my job? How will it affect my role? And so on, rather than going, well, what decisions can I make during this time? Can I make a decision to get on with it, or make a decision to stop worrying about it, or make a decision to find more information out, and so on and so on and so on. So we do often worry about other people's decisions rather than focusing on what decisions we can make. And sometimes somebody will make a decision and you just won't agree with it or get your head around it ever. So at that point we have to make a decision to move on or get stuck in transition. Okay, because that decision probably sparked a change for us. And if you remember all the work we've done on change and the transition curve, you might get, excuse me, you might get stuck in transition at that point, and that's not going to do you any good. Okay, so before we even get into the 6 or 7 things that I've put together on decision making, how to make an effective decision, sometimes decisions put us into a certain mode. Okay, so a decision is made and we go into fight, flight or freeze mode at this point with a decision. And again, this is all kind of preamble to making decisions, because if you're in fight, flight or freeze, it's quite hard for you to make a decision. It might not feel like that if you're in fight. It might feel like quite easy, but you won't necessarily make the right decision when you're in that phase. So let's just look at each of these phases, and then I'll finish off today with the different ways, different things you can have in place to make an effective decision. Okay. So when making a decision, or somebody else makes a decision, it can put you into one of these 3 vectors. If the decision is left to you and the responsibility is yours, it could potentially then put you into one of these sessions. So you could either panic and get very anxious and go into fight. You can worry and try to exit from it and go into flight, or you could actually freeze and do nothing and procrastinate. And it's not often when I use freeze. You've probably heard me talk about fight or flight quite a lot in the past because they're most common. But when it comes to decision making, freeze is quite a big one. You can see people when they're frozen. They don't know what decision to make. They don't know whether to fight or flight or action. So what they do is just nothing. They procrastinate, which doesn't make them feel very good. People always feel better once they've taken some action on a decision, albeit it might not be the right decision, but people still feel better when they've actually done something with it or exited from it, rather than just freeze. So I want you to kind of elevate that word freeze for this one. Because it's not something I talk about a lot, fight or flight all the time, but the freeze one in decision making is quite big for people. It delays things, it delays you feeling better to start with. It also delays actual decisions being made because we're that worried about it being the wrong one. So what we do is we just freeze and we start to procrastinate. I'm sure there are a number of people. On that note, let's just, we're back over 30. Fantastic, that's great. I'm sure there's a number of people on this call that have been in the freeze situation before, even if it's been for an hour or a day or maybe a week, yeah? Or if it's a big decision, maybe longer that you've been in, we get stuck in that freeze position. So let's look at fight, okay? My man, Muhammad Ali over here, you know I like using him. So if you go into a fight response, okay, so something's happened, you've got to make a decision, it's shot adrenaline into your system, and you're ready to fight the world, you're ready to tackle what needs to happen. You might think that's quite a good thing in decision making, and it can be. Christine's put yes. Yes, I've just got out of freeze. Thank you for that, Christine. It's quite common, Christine. I get stuck in freeze sometimes when you're in that indecision bit. I'll talk about that in a moment, okay, when we get to that slide. But it's probably the most common one. But if we go back to fight, okay, that fight situation, you might think it's quite a good thing for making decisions, and it can be, but it can also mean you make a snap decision very quickly. So first of all, it's a built-in response. It's one of the only natural responses we have. Fight, flight or freeze. Okay? So you can't really override it. You can try and curve it a little bit, but you might have to go in it because it's your body's way of trying to keep you safe. Okay? The brain can't tell the difference between fear and danger. Okay, so I've said this a few times before on different sessions. Your brain can't see the difference between fear and danger. So, if you are, I'm running a presentation skills course this afternoon, and there will be people on that course that are fearful of doing a presentation. And one of the first things I try and break down for them is that presentations don't kill you, as far as I'm aware, unless anybody can tell me different, and I might think of a career change. But as far as I'm aware, presentations won't kill you. However, if you're fearful of doing a presentation, you will get the same chemicals in your body than if you were in some kind of danger. And if we don't channel those chemicals right, it can put us into a fight position where we don't always notice everything, we're too quick to move, we don't weigh things up, and we make a decision very, very quickly. So does the fight response help you make a decision? Yeah, absolutely, of course it does. Will it be the right decision? Not always. And I can say this with some evidence, because being a high red profile, which I'll touch on in a bit, my tendency is to go into this when under pressure. Okay, and it's not always the right thing to do. So we need to just watch out for it, okay, when you're put into that fight position, right? We sense that our basic needs are threatened. So a business one is, how do I put this? If you feel like your position is threatened or your role is threatened, what I mean by that is, let's say somebody's done something and it almost, your perception is it might make you feel weak, or you haven't done your job properly. Self-image, that's probably the best way to say it actually. Your self-image has been impacted, or the perception is that it's been impacted. Yeah? So I've made a decision and somebody over there has gone, why the hell have they made a decision? They don't know what they're talking about, blah, 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 blah. All of a sudden, you feel like you have to fight for your self-image. You have to fight for your role and make a point to the world. I am good at my job. I am brilliant at my job. I work hard. Do you know how many hours put in? Do you know I really want this to work? And you just think I'm bang, 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 bang. And what it does is it forces us down that fight decision-making route. And it's not always the ideal route to go down on the back of it, okay? But it is inbuilt, and it's when we perceive it, that kind of threat, that we start going down this route. There you go, our self-esteem is threatened, is probably another way of saying it there. Can cause you to act quickly. So in one way, the fight response is quite good. It will make decisions happen quite quickly. But whether they're the right decisions or whether you've weighed it up effectively is another question. Okay, so that's one response that we can have before making decisions. The next one is our flight response. Okay, so now we've got the opposite. Again, this is built in. And again, the brain can't differentiate between fear and danger. So instead of this time it giving you adrenaline and anxiety, it's going to give you, it might still give you some adrenaline and anxiety, but not to fight. You're actually going to exit from it. Or it might have the adverse effect. It might make you low, sad, depressed, which then actually starts moving you into freeze as well at that point. So you go from flight into freeze at that point, okay. Can cause us to act quickly again, but this time away from the decision, not towards the decision. Okay, so that's the main difference. Fight and flight. Fight's going towards it. Flight is going away from it. Okay, can cause the decision to exit from the situation. Okay, so this is why sometimes things get too hard at work. So our productivity drops, our motivation drops, and we try to move away from it. That's flight. Yeah? Or you try and work harder at it to get it sorted. Fight. Yeah? Or which one's right? Neither. Probably want to work smarter anyway than harder these days, or just putting more hours in and all that type of stuff. But I'm sure that there's people on this call that have exited situations before, rather than actually made the decision because it was an away from motivation, they needed to move on. So, fight, flight. And then this third one is freeze. And again, like I said to you before, it's not one that I bring up a lot, but in decision making it's really, really important, and it might be the one that comes up most, actually, this indecision. And you can see here, rabbit in headlights moment. I'm sure you know what I mean by that. When you're kind of just startled, so you don't really do anything. You kind of just freeze. Yeah, and freeze it's quite a common one in decision making, because what your brain starts to do is come up with all the different scenarios of the decisions you could make, and there's too many, and they're normally problem focused and not solution focused, so you just freeze. At that point you don't do anything, and it stops us from decision making. Okay, it just stops us from making any decisions. It causes procrastination. So I've called this no man's land. So you're not fighting, you're not exiting from it. No, you're just in no man's land, in this frozen situation when nothing happens. There's two things that can help get you out of this. Okay, and again, the 7 or 6. I've written 6 and 7 on the next slide. That should be quite interesting, shouldn't it? Of what goes on. The 6 or 7 things that I'm going to give you in a moment around decision making will help you get out of this freeze situation that you're in. But there are 2 main ones. Okay. The first is set a deadline for the decision. Okay. So not set a deadline to complete whatever you're going to decide. Set a deadline to make the decision. Okay, so if you are undecided on something currently in your work or life, set a deadline for when you are going to decide it. Now what that does automatically, it might sound silly this, but let's say, I don't know, let's say that you've got a decision about moving house, for argument's sake, okay? Is it the right time to move house with what's going on, but you want to move house? Do you not move house for the next 5 years and put an extension on your current house? Blah, 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 whatever it may be, right? It could be causing you a bit of fight or flight, whatever, or it could be making you freeze, right? If it's making you freeze because it just seems all too difficult to sort out, okay, set a deadline for when you're going to make a decision. Not a deadline to complete the task, that has to come later, but set a deadline for when you're going to make the decision. So, you might sit there and go, right, by Monday next week, we will have made a decision of what we're going to do going forward with regarding selling our house. It's the same in the workplace. If you've got a project on or this, or you're not really sure what to do with that, and should I hand that off, or should I keep it myself, or whatever it may be, just make a deadline for when you're going to make the decision. Just write it in the diary. Decision made for X, that date. Okay? Now what that does is it gives your brain a target to work towards on making the decision. Okay, so that's step number 1. Step number 2 is taking some action on your decision. And what I mean by that is it might mean think of alternatives, it might mean gather information, and I'm going to go through that with you in a moment. 7 steps of decision making, okay? But I can't emphasize that one enough. Set a deadline, take the pressure off, start thinking about it, but think about it in a constructive way, get to that date, and let's say you've set it, I'm going to make the decision on Monday. By 5 p.m. or whenever you finish on Monday, you have made that decision. Which means that goes away then. You know, whether you've made the right decision or not, well, we all make mistakes. You can't all preempt the right decision. Brilliant, John. I'm nodding my head off here. Thank you, Fiona. I appreciate that. It is a good little tip. And, you know, if I say so myself, if you don't mind me saying so myself. And the reason why I'm being a bit brash about it is because... yes, I'm teaching it to you, but it really made a difference to me personally when I was a junior manager and somebody went, well, when are you going to make a decision by? What? Hey, what? You know, because sometimes when you haven't made a decision, there's no way you can start planning. The plan seems massive or too big or too far away, or, you know, when are you going to make the decision by? Yeah? It's as simple as that. I've got a personal decision that's coming up at the moment between me, something in my personal life. And it's a lovely decision, don't get me wrong, it's a nice to have decision, but, you know, with previous things that have happened, let's say, without me going into it in detail, with ex-marriages and things like that, it's a decision where I'm going, oh, do I move it forward, don't I move it forward, you know, it all went pear-shaped twice last time, will it get... I've got all of these kind of decisions going on. No, it's not getting married, Fiona. You can take that right back right now. I have made a decision about that 2 times, no more. Thank you very much. Okay, but it is about my girlfriend. Yeah. Look, you're all guessing. You're all guessing, Luke. I love it. I'm not telling you. It's personal to me. I do share most things with you, but this one's mine. Okay. So it's about. But it's a nice decision to make. But again, there's so many things going on there, and it's put me into a bit of freeze, to be honest, about stuff. So I have a date, 24th of September. We're all relationship counsellors now. Fantastic, good stuff. I love it, Christian. By the 24th of December, I would have made that decision. Okay, shaving the beard, yeah, absolutely, John, definitely. It's a bit more white now, isn't it? Yeah. So, look, the reason I'm sharing this with you, and yes, I'm having a giggle. But I still use it to this day. Sometimes I need to remind myself of it. So I'll get stuck in freeze for a bit and then go, John, just set a date. Set a date for when you're going to make a decision about that, will you? Just set a date and get it done. Yeah? I set a date, pressure comes off me straight away because I've got a date set in the diary. The brain, quite interestingly, once you take the pressure off, once you move out of freeze and you've got a date to work towards, your brain starts looking for answers to the decision anyway. It starts to look for answers for it. So hopefully that's been useful. It looks like it has from the feedback. So set a date to make the decision. Okay, so to finish off the session then, last 20-25 minutes. Quite interestingly, I've outdone myself today because I've got 6 essential steps of effective decision making with a great big number 7 there, which is quite interesting, isn't it? I think there are 7. I think that one's wrong, not that one. So let's go with it, shall we? But I did write 4 of these for you yesterday, all together, one after another. So it doesn't surprise me whether they're 6 or 7, because I wrote the one we're doing at 11:30 and the 2 for next week, all in one go. So go with me on it. So number 1, you could argue this is a process if you want. They're logical steps, but I also want you to bear in mind what we've said about freezing, fight and flight, and also qualitative decision making. Decision making based on feelings. This doesn't really bring that in. It will be part of it, but these are kind of logical steps. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Okay, so the first one is to identify the decision, right? Because a lot of people get this wrong as well. They don't know what quite decision it is they've got to make. Is it a decision on this big thing? Is it a pre-decision? Is it a decision about the process? Is it a decision about the people when it comes to it? And actually, quite interestingly, that's the first thing I've wrote. So, is it a decision that's behavioural? That's the first thing to think. Or is it a decision that's process-based? Because they're 2 different things. And you need to identify what it is. Okay? So, if I give you the example, let's say a company needs a new CRM system, client relationship management system, okay? You've got people and process in there with that. You could make a logical decision about the CRM and put a new CRM in, but you also need a decision that's behavioural. How will people take to the new system? What is their input? Are they likely to go into fight, flight or freeze with a new system when going through change? And so on and so on. So the first thing you need to do is identify what type of, well, first of all, what is the decision? And make sure you get the right, what is it we need to decide here straight away? What is it that can wait? What is it that can move on? What information do we need first? And so on and so on. But is it a behavioural decision or is it a process decision? Okay? Really analyse and try and understand what it is you need to decide. Too many people, I suppose, go into fight or flight, probably more fight, and go in and make a decision that's not really a decision that needs making at that point. So really strip it all back and go, what decision do we need to make first? Then we'll move on to the next decision. Then we'll move on to the next decision. Rather than going, yeah, we'll do all of that. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, it was great. Because there are decisions all the way along the way. And some of your decisions might change further down the line anyway, when you've got more information and so on and so on and so on. So, point number 1, I've got another one in there, haven't I? Yes, okay. Get the right starting point. Okay, and what I mean by that is, like we said, make sure you identify the right decision. Very briefly, if you are at point A and you want to get to point B, some people would have seen me do this when we did goal setting, okay? You need to make sure that you're defining the right decisions to make here at point A in order to get you to point B. Sounds straightforward, doesn't it? But if you're not quite right making the right decisions at point A, then what happens is that the actions after the decision, they veer off and you get to point C instead of point B. Okay? And for those that remember when we used this in goal setting, this causes, an emergent strategy. It's called an emergent strategy. When we want to go there, but we haven't quite made the right decision or actually scoped it out properly in the first place, or we make a quick decision and rather than, because we don't like it, so we make a quick decision rather than making the right decision or identify the right decision, and all of a sudden we end up getting to C. And of course at that point you have a big gap between B and C on your hands, and you don't quite get where you want to go. Okay? So we want to avoid that emergent strategy by spending time and making sure we're identifying the right decision. So that's point number one. Point number two. Gather info. They're not in order, are they? Sorry. Gather information. Gather information. Okay? So you need a fundamental understanding of things before making a decision. Okay? And this needs to be whether it's qualitative or quantitative. So again, people or process, when it comes to it. If it's a people decision, then you need an understanding of the people that are involved, the impact it's going to have, and so on. If it's a quantitative or process-driven decision, then you need to see the logical output of the process change, the process decision that you are making at that point. Okay? Really understand and analyse, and again, get the right starting point. Yeah? So you've got, in the first two, we've talked about number one, analysing, people, process, get the right starting point. Number two is gather more information, again analyse and get the right starting point on the back of it. Okay? So, done to number three. So, number one, make sure, is it the right, what's the decision, identify the decision. Number two, gather information, is it process, is it people, is it qualitative, is it quantitative, get as much information as you can. Now, I know sometimes decisions have to be made quickly. So when I say get as much information as you can, get as much information as you can within the time you have. Okay? Everybody would like 3 or 4 days to make every decision and research it and make sure belt and braces you're doing the right thing. Sometimes decisions have to be made quite quickly. Gather the information you can within the time that you have before you make the decision. Okay? Number three. Identify alternatives. So now what you've done is you've identified the decision, you've gathered a load of information, and now what you're going to do is look at alternatives. So in other words, what you're going to do is, first of all, could you use an old decision? So could you use something that you've done before? Have you got any history around this particular thing? Have you got a recall memory from when this has been done before? That is one of the best I suppose checkpoints, if you like, when looking at alternatives. Have I got any evidence of this happening before? We call it using your recall memory. When you think in possibilities, you either used your recall memory first, or you then imagine what it could be second. Okay, because you've got recall back, imagine forward. And recall is the benchmark. Have I done anything like this before? What were the results? What did I learn from it? What can we apply here? Okay? However, got to be careful of making the same decision and getting what you've always got. So if you guys remember, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And I've said that a number of times. So it's okay using some old information and making a decision, but if you need exactly the same result as last time. If you don't need exactly the same result, then you've got to do some possibility thinking. So we've got to now move to the new way of thinking and using your imagination rather than your recall memory. And you've got to generate some possibilities. How do you generate possibilities? You could do a mind storm or a mind map. I think it was last week we did mind mapping. Mind storming. I think that was last week. I showed you how to do a mind storm. If you want to know more about mind mapping, which is quite good before decision making to get all your thoughts down on paper, as well as mind storming, if you Google Tony Buzan, I might have mentioned it last week, Tony Buzan kind of coined mind mapping. You can have a look at that. Either way, whatever tool you use, this is the point where you think of possibilities. So you go, okay, so what are all the decisions? You've identified the decision, you've gathered information, but now you're going, well, just before we make the decision, are there any alternatives? What other possibilities are there out there? Okay? Now, so far in, you might be thinking, bloody hell, there's 3 things there I've got to do. Sometimes I don't get as much time. It doesn't take very long to do this. Okay, I think I proved last week that you can generate over 30 plus ideas in 5 minutes. We did it live on the session where we did a mind storm. Okay, so it doesn't take long to do this if you have the right tools and techniques. Okay. Also look for different points of view. This is where you would gather information from other people. Remember, you've got your filing cabinet. Other people have got their filing cabinets. So what you want to do is try and get other people's filing cabinets view before we make decisions sometimes. Okay? So that's number 3, identify alternatives. Number 4, weigh the evidence. So this is now where you're weighing things up. Okay, so you've identified the decision, you've started analysing it, you've started bringing in alternatives and other possibilities, other people's points of view, and now your job, because you're making the decision, is to weigh them up. Yeah, weigh up what you think, and now this will then be based on your filing cabinet again. So this is now going to go back into your filing cabinet because that's what the decision's got to be made on if you're making the decision, and you're changing those possibilities into priorities. So if you remember in goal setting, you've got possibilities, priorities, plan. It's the same in decision making. Once you've generated all the possible alternatives, you then weigh all of them up, and then you start to prioritize them, and you prioritize them by weighing them up. That one, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do that, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that. And then, of course, before you move on to the next bit in a moment and start to make a plan around it, okay? So weighing them up is really, really important. What are the fors and what are the againsts? Okay? So it's something that my dad always uses this is, if ever I've got a problem in my head, and my dad's a great sounding board for me. I know all this stuff. I know what to do. I teach it, you know I do. But whether I use it all the time, sometimes you need help. Sometimes you need other people, helping you with stuff. So, I've got a problem. I talk it over with my dad. And my dad simply says, get a piece of paper, son. Fors and againsts. And just fill in both columns. And I know what he's going to say. And sometimes it's annoying when he says it. But actually, it's really quite useful. What are the fors? What are the againsts? Weigh it up, make a decision based on it. Yeah? And of course, if you do the weighing up after you've done a bit of thinking about all the possible alternatives, okay, then you're in a better position to weigh up. Okay? This kind of leads on to number 5. And number 5 is then choose an alternative. Now, it's not particularly worded very well, this, because what it suggests is choose an alternative to what you were thinking in the first place. That's not what I'm getting at here. Basically, what this means is now make the decision. Choose which one of those you've been thinking about. Okay? Make the decision. Okay? Because you've done all that weighing up in your head. Yeah? Hopefully you haven't been doing that for weeks because you've set a date to do it and you've given yourself some time to think about it, and then you've gone and weighed it up and done it. remember how quickly people generated possibilities on the session that I did last week if you're on it. 5 minutes, 300 seconds, and we had over 180 ideas. Even if you take out half the crap, we had over 90 ideas in 5 minutes. Now, generating 90 ideas in 5 minutes, to some people, they feel like it's impossible. It's not impossible. You've just got to think about it in a slightly different way. Yeah? So, when you've got all of those ideas and that possibility thinking, and I very rarely make decisions now without possibility thinking. So if I've got a problem and I need to make a decision on it, yeah, a piece of paper and a pen, how could I possibly solve this problem? 40 answers. Okay, get rid of the crap. That leaves me with the priorities. Weigh up the priorities. Yeah, maybe get 1 or 2. Then maybe I do a for and against if I need to, either quickly in my head or write it down. And then I make a decision. And I choose the decision that I'm going to make. And through that process of elimination, I make the decision. Is it the right decision? Time will tell, won't it? If anybody's ever worried about making the right decision, okay, I remember once going into work. It was during my first divorce, okay. As you know, I've obviously had hundreds of divorces, but there you go. It was during my first divorce. And I remember going in and sitting down, and a boss of mine, a bit of a mentor, actually the person that got me into doing this for a living, okay, 20 odd years ago, Mike his name was. I came in and I was a bit upset, I was a bit stressed. You know, I had to end my marriage. It was my decision to do it. Things weren't right. I'd procrastinated for a long time and I had to make a decision, and I just couldn't bring myself to making the decision. And I remember sitting down with my boss, Mike, and my boss went, right, come on, we need to sort you out. What's the matter? So I told him, and he said, right, well, you need to make a decision. I said, I know that, Mike. I said, but what happens if I make the wrong decision? And Mike went, well, you won't. And I thought, well, first of all, that's a bit arrogant to say. I said, how stupid. I said, what do you mean I won't? And he said, you always make the right decision. And I thought he was being nice to me. And I went, well, thanks, Mike, I appreciate that. And he went, no, you don't understand. He said, everybody always makes the right decision. I said, what? What are you on about? I said, I've made some howlers in my career. What do you mean I always make the right decision? He said, we only know we've made the wrong decision with hindsight and learning. And as long as you don't repeat the same mistake, then you're okay. Everybody makes mistakes. If you make a decision and it's the wrong one, if you go back in 10 years' time, if you could go back to that same place, but you only knew what you knew at that moment, there was no hindsight. If you knew what you knew at that moment and the way you felt, you'd make the same decision again. So you always make the right decision. And I came out of that meeting with my head a little bit boggled, because it's not arrogant going, well, I always make the right decision. It was actually going, do you know what? I made the decision at the time with the way I felt, with the information I got. If it wasn't the right one, it wasn't the right one. And do you know what it did? Is it took massive pressure off me at that point to go, it's okay to make mistakes. The key is, if you did make a wrong decision in your perception with hindsight, the key is to learn from that and adapt and not to make the same mistake again. That's where the real win comes in decision making. Not whether you've made the right or wrong decision. Yeah? God, I've made some howlers in my time, guys. Believe me, I've made some right howlers, not just personal, work ones. Yeah? Made some right howlers. Yeah? I left a job to go into a new, I've gone from leisure to retail. I took a £10,000 pay cut because I wanted retail experience as well as leisure experience. And by the third day in my new job, I walked out. No job, with a mortgage, family. I walked out. Boy, did I think I'd made the wrong decision. Yeah, boy, did I beat myself up for the wrong decision. In fact, before I left the job in leisure, I'd not only taken a £10,000 pay cut, but that boss at the time offered me another £7,500 to stay. So I'd actually effectively taken a £17,500 pay cut to go into another industry to get, and then 3 days later I walked out because I didn't like it. Wasn't for me. Now, that is a howler of a decision. Did I learn from it? Absolutely. And quite interestingly, was it the right decision long term? Well, in 3 weeks I go down and run a 2-day program for that same boss. that's not my boss anymore. He's an ops director of a company, and he's used me for the last 10 years because I got a great relationship with him, and I left and I didn't burn any bridges, even though I did leave. So sometimes you think, have I made a howler? Yes, you might have made a howler, but how can you learn from it and adapt and do things differently next time? Yeah? Certainly when I went for a next job, I got more information about the job, I fundamentally understood it, I actually offered to go in and work for a little while so I could see what happened in the business before I made a snap decision to go and get another job, because it wasn't the job they promised me in the interview. Yeah? So, we've all made howlers, but you always make the right decision at the time with the information and the emotions that you've currently got. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but you don't have it at the time you make decisions. So please take that as take some pressure off you, make the decision, and if it's the wrong one, learn from it and don't make it again. There's not much more as human beings that we can do other than that, because we don't have an all-seeing eye. We can't see every single scenario play out in front of us. So again, hopefully that tip's been useful for us, useful for yourself. But I thought my boss was weird when he went, "You always make the right decision." And then he explained what he meant by it, and I thought, yeah, of course, everybody always makes the right decision at the time. But in hindsight, you might not want to make that decision. Now, whether other people make the right decision, in your opinion, that's different, because they've got a different filing cabinet to you. So I'm not on about other people's decisions. I'm on about your decisions at the time. Okay? Hopefully that's taking a bit of pressure off. Yeah? So make a decision. Once you've made the decision, don't question it. You've made the decision, go with it. If it's wrong, learn by it. But don't go, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that, you idiot. I shouldn't have done that. What's the point? You've done it. There's no point beating yourself up. You're going to have problem-focused self-talk that's going to lead, as you know, to problem-focused emotions and actions and results on the back of it. So the decision went pear-shaped. How can I learn from it? How can I apply something different in the future to put it right? Okay? Based on the first 4 steps you are making, you will make the best possible decision. So based on analysing, thinking about what you've seen in the past, getting other people's points of view, by doing all of that, you will make the best decision that you possibly can at that moment in time. Okay? Number 6, take action. Have I got number 6 twice? Hang on a second. Yeah, I got my things twice. There is 7. I am right, there is 7. So, number 6, once you've done all that, you've got to take some action on your decision. Okay? Simple, straightforward, got to take some action. By the way, once you've taken action, you'll feel better. Okay? Because if you're in that freeze, in that procrastination zone, once you take some action on it, you will start to feel better because you can start moving forward. Okay? Action will probably mean a change though. So bear this in mind. If your decision means somebody else is going to be impacted by change, then you've got to remember the transition curve, because they're going to go through it. So bear that in mind. There might be an adverse reaction. Excuse me, sorry, I didn't know that was on. There might be an adverse reaction to your decision because of people going through that transition curve. Now, I haven't got time to go into the transition curve again today, but we've done it loads. So go on the YouTube channel that we've made for you and have a look for that. But your decision might put people into change. So just bear that in mind, okay? You might have to help them through transition, okay? Helping with change, like I've said. There's 3 things to help people with change: information, involvement, and individual attention. You'll probably remember those 3 things from sessions that I've done in the past. If you want to help somebody through change and your decision might mean something changing, give them as much information as you can, involve them even in the decision making if you can, rather than just afterwards as well. And you might have some people that need some one-to-one attention to help them get their head around it, okay? And finally, number 7, review your decision. So when it's all said and done, and you've made the decision, and you've taken action on the decision, measure, measure, measure. And the reason that you need to measure is because you need to know whether your decision was good, not so good. You need to learn from it, you need to adapt, or you can make the same decision in the future and get a good result from it. People don't like to be measured, remember, it holds them to account. But without measurement, you don't know whether your decision's any good on the back of it. So you can measure, and you can learn from your measures, whether that's qualitative or quantitative. Learn from those measures, adapt and apply for the future. Okay? And then make some more decisions. because that will just be one decision that you've made, and now you need to go and make a whole ream more decisions for the rest of the day or week or month or year or whatever it may be. So that brings us to the end. I'm quite impressed. I'm about 30 seconds under time, which made a major difference for me because I'm normally running over. So hopefully you've enjoyed that session. We will get it uploaded on to the YouTube channel, 7 to 10 day lag, but we'll get it up there for you when it's edited. As always, if you can put some feedback in the chat box, that's great. If I see you at 11:30, then I'll welcome you back, and if I don't, have a great week, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.